Kominion, Chapter 15 of Shardik by Richard Adams. Keldrek crouched listening in the dark. There was no moon, and the forest overhead shut out the stars. He could hear the bear among the trees, and tried once again to make out whether it was moving away. But silence returned, broken only by the vibrant roaring of the frogs on the distant shore. After some time his straining ears caught a low growl. He called, "Peace, Lord Shardik, peace, my lord," and lay down, hoping that the bear might rest if it felt that he himself was tranquil. Soon he realized that his fingers were thrusting into the soft ground and that he was holding himself tense, ready to leap to his feet. He was afraid, not only of Lord Shardik in this uncertain, suspicious mood, but also because he knew that Shardik himself was uneasy. Of what, he could not tell. For days past the bear had been wandering through the woods and open places of the island, sometimes splashing among the reeds along the southern landward shore, sometimes turning inland to climb the central ridge, yet always tending eastwards, downstream, towards Ortelga, behind its jungle wall of traps and palisades. Night and day his votaries followed him. In all their hearts burned the fear of violent death, overborne by a wild hope and faith, hope for they knew not what, faith in the power of Lord Shardik returned to his people through fire and water. Keldrek himself remained constantly near the bear, observing all that it did, attentive to its moods and ways, its frightening habit of ramping from side to side in excitement or anger, its indolent curiosity, its slow-moving strength, like that of a great head of water, with which it would turn over a heavy stone, lift a fallen log, or push down a young tree. The dog-like snarling of its lip in suspicion, its shrinking from the heat of the rocks in the midday glare, and its preference for sleeping near water. At each sunset the singing was repeated, the women forming their wide half-circle about the bear, sometimes smoothly and symmetrically in open ground, often with more difficulty among trees or on rocky slopes. During the early days, most of those in the camp, ecstatic in their wonder and joy at the return of Shardik, came forward to offer themselves, eager to show their devotion greater than their fear, and to put to the proof the age-old skills they had learned on the ledges, but never envisaged that they would be required to practice in earnest. On the fourth evening, when the singers had formed a wide circle round a grove near the shore, the bear suddenly burst through the undergrowth and struck down the priestess Anthred with a blow that almost broke her body in two. She died at once. The singing ceased. Shardik disappeared into the forest, and it was not until noon of the following day that Keldrek, having tracked him with difficulty for many hours, found him at the foot of a rocky bank on the further side of the island. When the Tuginda reached the place, she walked forward alone and stood in prayer until it became plain that Shardik would not attack her. That evening she led the singing herself, moving without haste and gracefully as a girl whenever the bear came towards her. A day or two later, Sheldra, stepping backwards on a steep slope, stumbled and struck her head. Shardik, however, ignored her, shambling past as she lay dazed among the stones. When Keldrek raised her to her feet, she resumed her place without a word. At length, as the Tuginda had envisaged in speaking to Keldrek of the days gone by, Shardik seemed to become accustomed to the attendance of the women, and at times almost to play his part, towering erect and gazing at them, or prowling back and forth as though to try whether they had their art at command. 3 or 4, Sheldra among them, proved able to carry themselves steadily in his presence. Others, including some who had spent years in the service of Kiso and acquired every inflection and cadence, after a few evenings could no longer control their fear. To these Keldrek allowed respites, calling in turn upon one or another to play her part as best she could. As the singing began, he would watch them closely, for Shardik was keen to perceive fear and seemed angered by it, glaring with a look half intelligent, half savage, until the victim, her last shreds of courage consumed, broke the circle and turned tail, weeping with shame. As often as he could, Keldrek would forestall this anger, calling the girl out of the circle before the bear came down upon her. His own life he risked daily, but Shardik never so much as threatened him, lying quietly while the hunter approached to bring him food or examine his almost healed wounds. Indeed, as the days passed, returning thoughts of Ortelga and the High Baron came to cause him more fear than did Lord Shardik. Daily it grew harder to find and kill sufficient game, and he realized that in their eastward course down the island they must already have come close to exhausting its never-plentiful resources. As often as their wanderings brought them to the southern shore, the mainland bank of the Teltherna showed nearer across the tapering strait. How far were they now from Ortelga? What watch was Belcotrazet keeping upon them, and what would happen when they came, as at last they must, to the dead belt, with its maze of concealed snares? Even if he were able in some way to induce Shardik to turn back, what could follow but starvation? Daily, with the women looking on, he and the Tuginda stood before the bear and prayed aloud, "Reveal your power, Lord Shardik. Show us what we are to do." Alone with the Tuginda, he spoke of his anxieties, but was met always by a calm, untroubled faith, with which, had it come from anyone else, he would have lost patience. Now, crouching in the dark, he was full of doubt and uncertainty. For the first time since he had found him in the pit, he knew himself afraid of Shardik. All day they had killed no game, and at sunset such had been the bear's threatening ferocity that the singing had faltered and ceased, ragged and unpropitious. As the night fell, Shardik had wandered away into dense forest. Keldrek, taking Sheldra with him, had followed as best he could, expecting any moment to find himself the quarry and the bear the hunter, until at last, after how long he could not tell, for he could not see the stars, he had suddenly caught the sounds of Shardik's rambling movement not far off. There was no telling whether the bear would return to attack them, settle to sleep, or go further into the forest, and Keldrek, already weary, set himself to remain alert and wait. After a time Sheldra slept, but he himself lay listening intently to each minute noise in the dark. Sometimes he thought he could hear the bear's breathing or the rustle of leaves disturbed by its claws. As the hours wore on, he became intuitively aware that its mood had changed. It was no longer surly and ready to attack, but uneasy. He had never known or imagined Lord Shardik afraid. What could be the cause? Might some dangerous creature be close at hand? A great cat swum from the north bank, or one of the giant nocturnal snakes of which Belcotrazet had spoken? He rose to his feet and called once more, "Peace, Lord Shardik, your power is of God." At this moment, from somewhere in the darkness, a man whistled. Keldrek stood rigid. The blood pulsed in his head. 5, 6, 7, 8. Then, quietly but unmistakably, the whistler ran through the refrain of a song, "Senendril Nakora, Senendril Naro." An instant later, Sheldra grasped his wrist. "Who is it, my lord?" "I cannot tell," he whispered. "Wait." The girl strung her bow with barely a sound, and then guided his hand to the hilt of the knife at her belt. He drew it and crept forward. Close by, to his left, the bear growled and coughed. The thought of Lord Shardik pierced by the arrows of unseen enemies filled him with a desperate haste and anger. He began to push his way more quickly through the bushes. Immediately, from the darkness on his right, a low voice called, "Who's there?" Whoever had spoken, at least he himself, was now between him and Shardik. Peering, he could just make out the trunks of trees, black against a paler darkness, the open sky above the river. A faint wind stirred the leaves, and a star shone twinkling through. Now came the sound of movement like his own, the snapping of sticks and rustle of foliage. Suddenly he saw what he had been waiting for, an instant's flicker between one tree trunk and the next, so close that he was startled. 10 paces, 8. He wondered whether Belcotrazet himself might be close at hand, and in the same moment remembered the Baron's trick by the pool when he had distracted the bear. His groping fingers could not find a stone, but he squeezed together a handful of moist earth and tossed it upwards through the space between the tree trunks. It fell beyond with a disturbance of leaves, and as it did so, he dashed forward. He blundered into a man's back, a tall man, for his head struck him between the shoulders. The man staggered, and Keldrek, flinging one arm up and round his neck, jerked him backwards. The man fell heavily on top of him, and he twisted clear, raising Sheldra's knife. The man had not uttered a sound, and Keldrek thought, "He is alone." At this he felt less desperate, for Belcotrazet would have known better than to send one man to tackle Lord Shardik and his armed and devoted followers. He pressed the point of the knife against his throat and was about to call to Sheldra when the man spoke for the first time. "Where is Lord Shardik?" "What's that to you?" answered Kelderek, thrusting him back as he tried to sit up. "Who are you?" The man, amazingly, laughed. "I? Oh, I am a fellow who's come from Artelga through the dead belt, with a fancy to be knocked half silly for whistling in the dark. Was it Lord Shardik that taught you to crush a man's throat from behind like a Dealguy footpad?" Whether really unafraid, or only concealing his fear, he certainly seemed in no hurry to get away. "Come through the dead belt by night?" said Kelderek, startled in spite of himself. "You're lying." "As you please," replied the other. "It's no matter now. But in case you don't know it, you're only a few yards from the belt yourself. If the wind changes, you'll smell the smoke of Artelga. Shout loud, and the nearest Shendron will hear you." This, then, was the cause of Sherdik's uneasiness and sullen fear. He must have already smelt the town ahead. Suppose he should wander into the dead belt before morning. God will protect him, thought Kelderek. When daylight comes, he may turn back, but if he does not, I will follow him into the belt myself. It crossed his mind also that by morning the bear would be close to starving, and therefore still more savage and dangerous, but he put that thought aside and spoke once more to the stranger. "Why have you come?" he asked. "What are you seeking?" "Are you the hunter, the man who first saw Lord Shardik?" "My name is Kelderek, sometimes called Zenzuata. It was I who brought the news of Lord Shardik to the Tuginda." "Then we have met already, in the Sendrad, on the night when you set out for Kiso. I am Kominion." Kelderek remembered the tall young baron who had sat on the table and bantered him in his cups. He had felt confused and uncertain then, a common man among his betters, facing trouble alone. But matters had changed since. "So Belcatrazette sent you to murder me," he said, "and you found me less helpless than you expected." "Well, you're right this far," replied Takominion. "It's true that Belcatrazette is seeking your death, and it's true that that's the reason why I'm here. But now listen to me, Kelderek, play with the children. If you suppose that I've come alone through the dead belt on the off chance of coming across one man in miles of forest and killing him, then you must believe I'm a sorcerer. No, I came to look for you because I want to talk to you, and I came by land and darkness because I didn't want Belcatrazette to know of it. I had no idea where you might be, but it seems I've been lucky, if what you call luck's a half-broken neck and a blow on the elbow. Now tell me, is Lord Shardik here?" "He is not a bowshot away. Speak no ill of him, Takominion, if you want to live." "You must understand me better, Kelderek. I'm here as Belcatrazette's enemy and the friend of Lord Shardik. Let me tell you something of what has been happening in Artelga since you left." "Wait!" Kelderek gripped the other's arm. Crouching together and listening, they could both hear Shardik moving in the forest. "Sheldra," called Kelderek, "which way is he going?" "He is returning, my lord, by the way he came. Shall I go back and warn the Tuginda?" "Yes, but try not to lose him if he should wander further." "So," said Takominion after a few moments, "they obey you, do they, Lord Kelderek? Well, if all I hear is true, you deserve it. Belcatrazette told the barons that you struck him down." "I threw a stone. He was about to kill Lord Shardik while he lay helpless." "So he said. He told us of the folly and danger of allowing the people to believe that Lord Shardik had returned. 'Those women will ruin us all,' he said, 'with that half-burnt bear they've got hold of. God knows what superstitious rubbish will come of it if they're not packed off where they belong. It'll be the end of all law and order.' He sent men out to look for you at the western end of the island, but you'd gone from there, it seems. One of them tracked you eastwards almost as far as this, but when he came back it was to me he spoke and not to Belcatrazette." "Why?" Takominion laid a hand on Kelderek's knee. "The people know the truth," he said. "One of the Tuginda's girls came to Artelga, but even if she had not, truth blows through the leaves and trickles between the stones. The people are weary of Belcatrazette's harshness. They are speaking secretly of Lord Shardik and waiting for him to come. If need be, they are ready to die for him. In his heart, Belcatrazette knows this, and he is afraid." "Why," answered Kelderek, "that morning when he left the Tuginda, I saw the fear already in his eyes. I pitied him then, and I still pity him, but he has set himself up against Lord Shardik. If a man chooses to stand in the path of a fire, can the fire take pity on him?" "He thinks—" Kelderek cut him short. "What do you want with me, then?" "The people are not Belcatrazette. They know that Lord Shardik has returned to them. I have seen decent, simple men in Ortelga weeping for joy and hope. They are ready to rise against Belcatrazet and to follow me. To follow you? Follow you where? In the solitude of the forest, Kominion dropped his voice still lower. To Bekla, to regain what is ours. Keldrek drew in his breath. You're seriously planning to attack Bekla? With the power of Lord Shardik we cannot fail. But, Keldrek, will you join us? They say you have no fear of Shardik and can persuade him as you will. Is that true? Only in part. God has made of me a vessel let down into Shardik's well, and a brand lighted at his fire. He suffers me, nevertheless to be near him is always to be in danger. Could you bring him to Ortelga? Neither I nor anyone can drive Lord Shardik. He is the power of God. If it is so ordained, he will come to Ortelga. Yet how can he pass the dead belt? And what is it that you mean to do? My own men are ready to strike now. They will make him a path through the belt, along this shore. That's the easiest place. Only let Lord Shardik come, and every man will join us. Yes, join you and me, Keldrek. As soon as we are sure of Ortelga, then we'll march at once on Bekla before they can learn the news. You make it sound easy, but I tell you again, I cannot bring Lord Shardik here and there like an ox. He acts by the will of God, not by my will. If you had seen him, faced him, you would understand. Let me face him then. I will stand before him and beg him to help us. I'm not afraid. I tell you, Keldrek, all Ortelga is eager only to serve him. If I entreat him, he will give me a sign. Very well, come with me. You shall speak with the Tuginda and face Lord Shardik for yourself. But if he gives you death, Kominion, he will give much where much is offered. I have come to offer my life. If he takes it, why then shall I not live to be disappointed? If he gives it back to me, I will spend it in his service. For answer, Keldrek got to his feet and began to lead the way through the undergrowth. The night was still so dark, however, that he found it all but impossible to tell in which direction the camp lay. Feeling before them, they stumbled repeatedly. Once Kominion nearly put out his eye on a pointed branch that pierced him under the lower lid. Keldrek could not tell how far they had gone, or whether they might not have wandered in a circle. At last he glimpsed, still some distance off, the glow of a fire. He made towards it cautiously, expecting at any moment to be challenged by one of the girls, or even to come upon Lord Shardik himself, prowling in his angry hunger. But they met no one, and at length, looking about him in perplexity, he realized that they had already reached the outskirts of the camp. They walked on side by side over the open ground, strewn with cut branches and garments, where the women had been sleeping, and so up to the untended remains of the fire. Keldrek's perplexity became bewilderment. The place was deserted. Apparently there was no one whatever in the camp. He called, "Ransay! Sheldra!" Receiving no reply, he shouted, "Where are you?" The echo died, and for some moments he could hear only the frogs and the rustle of the leaves. Then he was answered. "Lord Keldrek!" It was Ransay's harsh voice from the direction of the shore. "Come quickly, my lord!" He had never heard her so much excited. He began to run, and as he did so realized that it was growing light. Light enough, at all events, to enable them to see their way to the river. As they approached, he could make out the canoes, and, closer at hand, the cloaked shapes of the women crowding together, some apparently up to their knees in the water. All were pressing forward, pointing, moving their heads one way and another, and peering through the reeds. Beside the tall figure of Ransay, he recognized that of the Tuginda, and ran towards her. "What is it, Sayet? What has happened?" Without speaking, she took his arm and led him down into the shallows, among the reeds taller than his head. Between these, something had smashed a path, and down this narrow lane he gazed out towards the Teltherna beyond. Over it the light was increasing, a windless twilight grey without shadows. The far trees were motionless, the flowing water smooth. Still the Tuginda waded forward, and still he followed, wondering at her haste. Waist deep, feet groping, they reached the outer edge of the reed belt, and to the left and right the extent of the river opened before them. The Tuginda, one hand on his shoulder, pointed downstream to where a wide ripple like an arrowhead was breaking the calm surface. At its apex, the only living thing to be seen in all the expanse of trees and water, Shardik was swimming, his muzzle thrust upwards at the sky as the current carried him towards Ortelga.